Hello, everyone. If you're joining now, almost good afternoon. I've got one more minute till good afternoon, and we're really excited about our midday keynotes and agenda for today. We're going to go ahead and give it another minute or so for people to join and get out of those sessions. Some really just fantastic sessions this morning with a wide range of content, everything from corporate sustainability and sort of post-COVID response and maintaining community during the pandemic to looking at the issues around implementing reach codes and building decarbonization across a portfolio. I particularly liked the session that was looking at equity in our urban landscapes and looking at green space. That's one of those issues. The more you dive into it, the more your mind expands about the history of things that have been done in our country to really set up and design our communities. And in some ways, that's a good lead in to our session here in the middle of the day. To kick things off for us and to sort of recenter ourselves after our time this morning, doing a little bit of learning, we're really proud to feature another poem from Right Girl called I Almost Forgot by Kai Adia. There's no audio, Becky, just so you...
Publishing, we're women-owned and operated in Los Angeles as well. I'm so happy to share a poem for this conference, and it is called Some Days I Forget. Hope you enjoy. Some days I forget. I forget I live next to a freeway. I hardly hear the cars. Most days, the tireless tires sound like winds. I live next to Interstate 10, to be exact, a cement belt bisecting my community into fragmented parcels of historic homes, crumbling apartments, and minimal green space. I live 4 houses away from the 10's outstretched arm, in the bones of a centuries-old craftsman. When I trail my finger across her outer wood details, I clear a path through fine soot. I doubt it's simply dirt when gaseous exhaust fleets to my window. I guess I'm lucky the traffic is hardly ever always bumper to bumper on the off-ramp. I'll always remember my city in lockdown. My city calling for me to leave the house for a burst of movement on her cracked pavements. My legs itching to walk beyond the bones of my home. I'll remember the day I walked across a near empty 10 freeway. I'll remember how I looked up and saw a near perfect blue sky. I could even see the Hollywood sign winking back at me. How surreal it all felt. I snapped a photo to help me remember. Knowing this view was limited, knowing photochemical smog would soon cover those letters. I snapped a photo in awe, thinking, let time stand still right here. So the only whoosh I hear is the wind. Thank you. Hope you enjoy, and please have a wonderful conference.
Wow. I think that sets the stage amazingly for this conversation, because certainly Los Angeles is an area where the combination of where we put our most noxious infrastructure, how we handle open green space, how we treat our most fragile communities is the challenge that Capri Maddox is going to help us start to address after long years of real inequity. It's such a pleasure to welcome Capri to this conference, because we believe that environmental justice, great jobs from green technologies, and good jobs for all addressing all of the issues of justice in its biggest sense are critically part of the sustainable future. She's the founding director of the newly established Los Angeles Department of, I'm going to get it exactly right, of Civil and Human Rights. And everything in her background, from her work on the LA Board of Public Works to her role as a senior advisor to City Attorney Mike Fuhrer, to her role with LAUSD, is about partnerships and breaking down barriers and between silos, and recognizing the role we all have to make Los Angeles's future greater, more just, and certainly more sustainable. So with that, thank you, Capri, for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Kate. Thank you for that kind introduction and for your service as a board member. I really want to thank the U.S. Green Building Council of Los Angeles, particularly your executive director, Ben Stapleton, and everyone who joined the conference this year. As you noted, my name is Capri Maddox. I am the executive director of LA's new, I'll help you out here, Civil, Human Rights, and Equity Department, also known as LA Civil Rights. We had so many people wanting to put so many things as a part of our department that the name kept going and growing. But our department was created to address discrimination in private commerce, education, and housing, as well as a focus on equity and empowerment. And I want to talk to you about a number of things, but first, I just wanted to give a shout out to one of your upcoming speakers, our great mayor, Mayor Eric Garcetti, for leading the charge in establishing this department, which was funded by City Council. And I want to thank the mayor for allowing me to serve as the first executive director. It's really important to know that the mayor tapped me to do this, and we started discussions about this in December of 2019. And so he was ahead of all that was going to happen in 2020 in so many ways. But before I begin, I really wanted to touch on the fact that, you know, why do we need a civil rights department in Los Angeles, California in the year 2020, 2021? Well, the best way to really answer, you know, this question is to think about, you know, the Los Angeles that we have inherited. You know, poverty, inequality, of course, racial injustice. And we've seen some of these things, you know, come to the forefront this year with the COVID crisis, hate crimes, and a number of disparities that we've dealt with, of course, the racial reckoning of 2020. But these aren't by accident. These things are by design. And I think, you know, since we all are taking a moment to look at like the why, you know, things happened and how things happen, it's important for us to lean in with our various professions and to say, you know, how did this happen? And so I really wanted to direct you to the fact that Mark has placed our organization in the chat so that you can find us in a online at civilandhumanrights.lacity.org. And I'm going to share the screen for just a moment to talk about, you know, some of the inequities and really how things line up. When you see this document, this map here, of course, you see Sugar Hill and Boyle Heights highlighted here. It's a map of Los Angeles. Many of you may be aware this is a map of Los Angeles in the original picture I showed you was a map of Los Angeles in 1939, and yeah, that's the original map. And then when we look down at the second slide, we can talk a little bit more about, you know, how Los Angeles looks now. But in 1939, the Homeowners Loan Corporation had a map of Los Angeles, which determined the neighborhoods where the federal government would back home mortgages. And it's an example of redlining. And I don't have to tell you that everyone living in these neighborhoods that are highlighted in red had little chance of owning a home. No opportunity to build wealth, and most of these folks were African American and Latino households that were forced into these neighborhoods by racial covenants. I've lived in houses that had racial covenants, and even as a kid, I lived in a house that had to be purchased by an attorney. So my father had to pay even more money for his home because he had to pay an attorney to stand in as the buyer and for that property. And so I think it's, and I was scared for a long time, wondering like, if this person ever decides to take our house, they probably could legally do it. But I want to be very clear that it's just one of the many things that we call in the African American community the Black tax. And of course, racial covenants are gone, but some of the after effects are still here. And we have to know that many of these communities found ways to flourish, like Sugar Hill, like Boyle Heights. And KPCC did a story recently about Sugar Hill, and actually had some folks that grew up in Sugar Hill before the freeways were built to talk about, you know, life there in Berkeley Square. Wanted to, you know, show you, of course, the map of Los Angeles now with the freeways there. And, you know, it's really important to know that on the second slide that we're showing here, you can see the freeway systems that were constructed in the 50s and 60s. They were built directly on top of redlining maps. So it was like something being wrong, and now we exacerbated the inequities here. And so you can see that the 110 freeway sliced through South Los Angeles, the 101 cut up through the working class neighborhoods of Hollywood. And then of course the 10 freeway cut straight through Boyle Heights and Sugar Hill. And no one wants a freeway running through their backyard, as we, you know, heard from our amazing poet from Right Girl, you know, just knowing that you have soot and dust, and we know that it's just not dust from the ground that's coming up from our trees. We're talking about you know, brake dust and other things that are hazards and cancerous. And we know there have been many studies about the impacts of living so close to a freeway as it relates to comorbidity factors that a lot of people had to deal with as we dealt with the COVID challenges. And so I want to just share quickly that the redlining that was officially made illegal in 1968 is still the infrastructure that we live with today. And so it's important to know that you can deal with some inequities as it relates to, you know, policy changes, but I will say culture trumps policy. And I think it's very important for us to understand in this space where we live and work, and some of the things that you all are dealing with as builders. And of course, you know, this is you know, how our city looks now on another map. And I didn't want to spend too much time talking about, you know, maps, but I think there are a number of things to think about. Freeways are just one example of these overlays. We have power plants and oil drills and waste facilities that also follow this pattern. And to this day, the #1 predictor of whether you live closer to any pollution sites is your race. I actually was driving yesterday to take my son, you know, down to, you know, visit the folks at Kedron. We do a lot of work with COVID equity, and we were going down to the Kedron site yesterday. And so I was driving Slauson, and you could see all these factories. I even saw a site, you know, in Southeast Los Angeles where they had it, they had a fence. It was right across from Vermont Slauson Economic Corporation and Economic Development Corporation. And there was a sign on the a fence that said, the dirt on this property contains arsenic, beware. And there are people living and breathing this air right now in America, Los Angeles, California, today. And I saw that sign last night at around 7 o'clock. I think it is important to know that asthma rates are very high for African Americans, especially African American children. I was one of those kids, I was twice as likely to have asthma. So yeah, I had asthma. And as we dealt with the COVID crisis, last year was tough for me because I had to be really careful. And my doctors were telling me, like, if you get COVID, this is even before a lot of the ads are on TV, they're like, you have to call us right away because you are a high candidate for to be in ICU. So you have to call and we may have to put you on a cocktail right away or else you will have problems. And they still impact my life, today. And I think it is really important to know that as a kid in LA, we had smog days back when I was a kid. So it was really, as bad as it is now, it was even worse back then. But our Latino Angelenos are two to three times more likely to die from COVID than their white counterparts. And a lot of, again, are tied to to food deserts and other comorbidity factors. So we know the problem. Where do we go from here, right? And the first thing when you have a problem is to, you need to recognize it, right? And we know that the inequities didn't come, out of the blue. We know that they came from somewhere. They started by people making choices, by people like that are in your positions or in positions, close to where you are, making decisions years and years ago. And so I want us to be intentional that when people look back at what we were doing, they say, 50 years ago, people in the city stood up and they did these things. You made Los Angeles better. And then, of course, your respective hometowns as well. So although we had an opportunity to, in our department to deal with discriminatory practices as it relates to commerce, education, employment, housing, I think it is really, thank you so much, Nancy. I really think it is important to talk about the good news. We have diversity and power today that can really, shape the future. The first thing is to bring, more diverse experiences and lived experiences to the table. Just think about the voice of our poet that shared with us just now. I mean, just imagine if she were to, take on a planning role or to be a part of this council, one day as an adult. She would remember what it was like to live 4 houses from a freeway. People who grew up with pollution and communities are directly impacted. And even when I served as president of the Board of Public Works here in the city of Los Angeles, I had an opportunity to weigh in on some policy decisions as it relates to making sure things were better for the next generation of for people from underrepresented communities. So I just want you to know that people that grew up with these experiences are best equipped to, share some of the best solutions. And if we can listen to those voices, it can make a big difference. The other thing I think people want to do in this time is to have spaces that are more equitable. When you think about equity, it's, that's making sure that the playing field is level. And we know that we didn't all start off on the same footing. And so we need to be intentional in this space to make sure that we create opportunities for others. And we have the RENEW program, which stands for Racial Equity in Newly Empowered Workplaces. And the RENEW, I think Mark will probably put that in the chat very soon. But it's a pledge that a number of companies have taken in Los Angeles under the encouragement of Mayor Garcetti to step up their game. And the Annenberg Foundation has helped us in a substantial way with a generous grant to say, where are you on hiring, promotion, and pay equity and other factors for these private companies? Where are you with your numbers, and where do you want to be by 2025, from 2020 to 2025? And you would be surprised at how many companies really stepped up. We have Ernst & Young. We have Gensler, who's actually also building our office space that's about 85% complete. It'll be down in the LA Mall for those that are here in Los Angeles. And we appreciate, Gensler, the architectural firm, for really leaning in and to help us to build a wonderful space that's going to serve so many folks, which will include our office space as well as the John Lewis Conference Center that will have the capacity for about 60 people to come and convene and talk about issues and move forward on a number of agendas. But we have Universal Music, for example, that's also a part of our pledge. And the pledge is to increase the number of African-American and Latinos that are hired, get those numbers up at 30%, thinking about increasing those numbers by 16% for manager and executive roles, looking at opportunities to increase procurement opportunities by 14%, thinking about using 12% of increasing your numbers by 12% for your marketing and business development, and doubling the amount of resources for equity causes. The other thing I'll say is to get to 100% pay equity. And there's so many companies, about 20 of them, that have taken the pledge that between 2020 and 2025, they would like to increase their numbers. And if your company is interested in joining that pledge, we would be honored to have you. The other thing that I wanted to say is you can partner with us on youth empowerment. And we have a component in our equity piece called Upward Mobility Programming. And that helps people get into the middle class and beyond. It's an opportunity for people to learn about the careers. When I was president of the Board of Public Works here in Los Angeles, we had an opportunity for many of our engineering firms to have mentorship programs where they paid young people from our local high schools, LAUSD high schools, to participate in a program where they paid them $2,500 a summer to just come and learn about career paths. They did interviews, first and second interviews and everything. And it was a wonderful experience. And the kids that go through that program are really going to have an advantage in the years to come. And these are kids from South LA, Boyle Heights, Pacoima, which is a part of our valley here. I wanted to let you know that when we think about, pipelines for young people, we need to think about, using your privilege of being, a planner, an architect, a designer, a builder. I know that, as an attorney, a lot of times that I think I have a panel that I'm doing later this afternoon to encourage more young people to come into my field. And I would love for you all to do the same, particularly in underserved and underrepresented community. And then finally, we need to build things out to just really help, communities thrive. When you think about, Los Angeles in general, we have a number of opportunities to not only use our positions and, in building and planning and other opportunities, we have a wonderful opportunity to kind of make things right in the years to come. And the thing you can do in this space is to support local solutions that are already on the ground, urban farming, local environment groups, health-based organizations. It's important to not only include communities of color in this work, but to start with communities of color. As a person of color, a lot of times something's happening, and they call us like the month before they roll it out and say, hey, how can we help? And I wanted to give a shout out to LA 28. They're getting ready for the Olympics here for creating, equity groups and equity panels now instead of waiting until right before the Olympics to reach out to communities. So there are no quick fixes. I don't have to tell you that there's not one person on this call that can solve 400 years of oppression. Not even the head of the LA Civil Rights Department. But we must start, and we must put our whole intention behind it. We're excited to, join you in shaping a Los Angeles in the future within the Civil Rights Department and in your own communities. I just wanted to tell you that we were intentional to be sure that we brought on a Fuse Fellow, and we have a Fuse Fellow that's donated to us at a value of about $150,000. And we have Ronell Hampton from the communities in South Los Angeles. Actually, he's from San Diego, but he served a great deal in South Los Angeles. He has a master's degree in urban sustainability and was a policy leader at the Los Angeles Food Policy Council. He also worked at Hoptics, which is a local homeless outreach service provider in South LA. So we're bringing people on board to help shape our equity lens and to help us with, the policy equity lens of like, what do we do with our city budget? How do we deal with food deserts, the digital divide, and of course, the end stages of the COVID crisis. So I want to be really intentional to say that together we have a number of areas where we could work, like I said, with the food deserts, preventing food deserts, the digital divide, and other areas of equity issues in our urban design. You can follow us and our department at civilandhumanrights.lacity.org or on social media at Civil Rights. Thank you for joining me today. And I'd really like to thank the U.S. Green Building Council of Los Angeles for having me today. Keep the faith. Keep the fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And again, thank you, especially Capri Maddox. We can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom and your work and so much of the advocacy that you're doing right now. It's absolutely invaluable and just so appreciated from us all. So thank you. And with that, we have Mayor Eric Garcetti speaking next. He's going to be speaking right before the power panel. So if you all don't mind jumping into the next session, you'll need to click onto your agenda over onto the left toolbar if you're on the desktop app, or if you're on your phone, you'll just click on agenda.